Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. This one I'm looking forward to today because it is a special Patreon request. But we've got Roger here and he says, hey, and then we have Miss Scarlet and she is chilling under the desk today. But we are going to be doing, like I said, a Patreon request. This one comes from Nikolai. I'm hoping that's how you say your name. But he says that the Slavs and Vikings he requested the Slavs and the Vikings, medieval Russia, and the origins of the Kievan Rus. He says there's also a series. This is just the first one, but you should find the other videos in a playlist of his. So this is on the Kings and Generals channel, which I really have enjoyed the one or two videos that I've done of them or on the channel in the past. I think the video I did on Trafalgar, that battle that was part of my Napoleonic Wars series, that was the Kings and Generals one. I feel like I've done maybe one other one, but I can't recall what it is exactly. But this one is going to be interesting because I did a video not too long ago on the rise of the Slavs. And I've been learning, especially through my World War I videos that I've done, that a lot of the Balkan countries are made up of the Slavic people, and that they are related to Russia ethnically, and so they've always kind of had this connection to Russia. And in my video on the rise of the Slavs, I learned a little bit more about their origins, where they come from, and kind of like how they spread out across Europe. And I don't remember the percentage, but there was a very high percentage of the European population, maybe the world population, they're actually Slavic, and it was a very high percentage, and so I was really kind of surprised at that. And then when it comes to the Vikings, I have been, let me get rid of this comment. When it comes to the Vikings, I have been learning more about them on Horrible Histories, which I'm watching over on Patreon, doing the entire Horrible Histories series over there. And pretty much at every single episode, they do bring up the Vikings in some way. Hence, Roger with his Vikings helmet right here. But, yeah, so I haven't really gone into a lot of depth with them. I just know that they pillaged England. They also came over here. I think Leif Erikson was a Viking who came over here to the US, or the Americas, and he was like the first person to discover, I think, America or something. So I'm hoping that I will learn more about the Vikings in this video as well. Now, what the Vikings have to do with the Slavs, like how they go together, I'm not entirely sure. So that'll be interesting to see. And also, this video is on medieval Russia as well. In the medieval times, it's definitely a period of history that I haven't really gotten too into depth with. For whatever reason, I just was never really drawn to medieval history before, but I am learning a little bit more about it as I go through these videos on my channel and on Patreon as well. So, and when it comes to the Kievan Rus, I hope I'm saying that correctly, I did see them mentioned very, very quickly, like for 2 seconds, in the History of the Entire World video that I did also just a few days ago on my channel, and that triggered me remembering of this request from Nikolai here. I was like, oh yeah, I have a video that I need to do on that. So yeah, they were just very, very briefly mentioned in that. So it'll be interesting to learn more about who these people are and where they kind of fit in when it comes to history. So, all right, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this video.
Russia today is the largest country on Earth, and one of the most influential in human history. Despite this, the earliest origins of this massive nation are often neglected. This is certainly not for lack of interesting stories, as the cast of people that feature in early Russian history are nothing short of colourful. Welcome to our first video in our series on the history of Russia, where we will cover the ancient origins of this most enigmatic land. By the way, a quick aside, I'm Devin, the voice of Kings and Generals, pleased to meet you, and this time the video is sponsored by me. I actually made a turn-based tactics video game called Godless. For millennia, the grassy plains of the Ukraine and southern Russia, the Ponto-Caspian steppe, had been inhabited by a diverse cast of hardy nomadic people thriving along the Don, Dnieper and Volga rivers. The first written accounts of this land date back to classical antiquity in the 7th century BC. During this time, the steppe was dominated by various tribes of Iranian origin, the most prominent being the Scythians and Sarmatians. The ancient Greeks, who had a smattering of cities along the shore of the Black Sea, recorded stories about the nomads who lived to the north. Herodotus relates a tale that claims the Scythians were born of a union of the demigod Hercules and a serpent woman. Meanwhile, the Sarmatians were known for the legendary strength of their women, and therefore were considered a product of mixing between the Scythians and mythical Amazonian warriors. More historically reliable accounts describe these Iranic pastoralists as a sturdy people who lived and died on the backs of their steeds, subsisting on horse milk and meat, while enjoying the pleasures of psychoactive herbs and undiluted wines. For centuries, their domination of the steppe would be near unchallenged, but further to the north, a young and ambitious tribe was finding its bearings. These, of course, were the Slavs. The true origins of the Slavs are shrouded in mystery. The earliest written accounts of their existence come from Roman sources. In the 1st century AD, the senator and historian Tacitus described a tribe he called the Venedi, a people who lived primarily along the Vistula River. Tacitus noted that they built homes, carried...
I like going back and looking at maps like this because it kind of helps me understand the layout of the different people and stuff, and I don't know, way back in ancient times, and I guess when exactly he said 1st century AD, so I'm assuming that's what this map is showing is 1st century AD. So we're not quite to the medieval period yet. We've got the Roman Empire here, Germanic tribes, which I'm learning more about these. This word Germanic, this actually gives me some trouble because I see people in the comments write that a lot of talking about Germanic peoples, and this is just like talking about the ancestors of Germany, right? Like what we consider German people today. I'm assuming that's what that is referring to, but there's also a part of me that thinks that that is referring to language, like Germanic languages. So I'm not sure exactly. Maybe it's both. But if you guys could just clarify that for me, I think it's because I think in the Holy Roman Empire video they were talking about the Germanic tribes and how they all came together to form the Holy Roman Empire. So that may just be what this is the precursors to the Germans. But okay, so Iranian tribes, the Huns, which that's what I think a lot of people started referring to the Germans as, is the Huns. They're way down here, next to Greece. So I would have expected them to be a little bit further northwest in Europe. Sarmatians, we have a lot of Greek, the Goths. Okay. And then the Franks, of course, up there in kind of close to modern France. Okay. Adriatic Sea, so that's where that is. Okay, sorry if this is boring to all of you guys. I like being able to see maps, and because I like visual things that lay things out visually for me. It helps me understand things a lot better. And we have the Saxons up here, which I have learned through horrible histories. The Saxons were they also invaded England. So England got invaded by the Romans, the Saxons, the Normans, the Vikings. It's crazy. All right.
From Roman sources. In the 1st century AD, the senator and historian Tacitus described a tribe he called the Venedi, a people who lived...
Which in Latin I would say that would be pronounced Venedi, not Venede? Is that what he said?
...primarily along the Vistula River. Tacitus noted that they built homes, carried shields, and fought unmounted, distinguishing them from their nomadic Sarmatian neighbours. Dismissed as yet another barbarian people by the classical civilizations, the Venedi were most likely the progenitors of all of today's Slavic nations. For centuries, these Proto-Slavs were hemmed in by their powerful Celtic and Germanic neighbours to the west, and Scytho-Sarmatians to the south. This changed between the 4th and 6th centuries as a great migration took place, with the Huns and various Germanic peoples migrating into the borders of the collapsing Western Roman Empire. Broadly speaking, this enormous migration allowed the early Slavs to expand beyond their original homeland in all directions. By then, the Venedi had diffused into numerous distinct branching tribes. Some tribes crossed the Danube into Eastern Roman territory, seizing lands for themselves in the Balkans and becoming the forebears of the South Slavs. Some tribes ventured westward into the domain of the Avars. There they carved a home for themselves and became the eventual predecessors of the Western Slavs.
Okay, so the Danube is right here. So this separates basically. It's hard to tell where we are in this. Okay, so Italy is right in here. Okay, this is the boot of Italy right here. So going over here, shoot, it's hard for me to. So this would be like where the Balkan states are, or the Balkan countries are now. Right, so you would have like Croatia, Kosovo, I'm blanking on all of these countries. Slovenia, Slovakia, what's the one that's North Macedonia? There's another one that starts with M that I can't, it's not coming to mind, but so the Danube kind of separates the Balkan countries from Russia. Is that right? Because I hear this referred to a lot, the Danube River, and I can never like picture where it is. So I'm just like trying to cement that in my head. So we have the Rhine and the Danube seem to be like two major rivers that keep coming up over and over again in history. So it's helpful for me to kind of like map in my brain where they're located. I know the Rhine's in Germany, but the Danube I wasn't sure. Okay, and so we see this migration coming in, and that's where the Balkan countries are. And then this would be like what we consider Eastern Europe today, like the Baltic states, maybe, going up in this direction. Okay, so that's interesting. So there was a migration from Russia to these areas. All right.
Most important to our story are the tribes who went eastwards into modern Ukraine. The Scythians and Sarmatians, who for centuries had dominated the steppe, were weakened by centuries of war with the Goths, Romans and Huns. The Proto-Slavs sunk their roots into this unstable region, eventually assimilating the last remnants of these ancient peoples. While we know little of this eastern migration, it is evident that in the following decades, Slavic peoples would continue to expand across much of modern Ukraine, Belarus, and central western Russia, intermixing with various clans of indigenous Finno-Ugrics and Baltic peoples, the ancestral cousins of Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, and Finns. By 750 AD, the Eastern Slavs occupied land from Lake Ladoga in the north to the coast of the Black Sea.
Okay, what I'm also trying to wrap my head around here is, so all of these different names of these peoples right here, are these just considered like tribes, basically? They may all share that ethnic background of being from Russia, the Slavic background, but is that kind of like what Europe used to be? I'm just trying to learn more about, understand more about the makeup of Europe prior, because I'm really, the only real knowledge I have of how Europe is made up is the way it is now, the way it's been in my lifetime, and then I've gone back a little bit in history, obviously the Holy Roman Empire, learning more about that, how those were just a bunch of kingdoms, basically a mishmash of kingdoms stemming from the Roman Catholic Church and kings and stuff that just wanted to like set up their own kingdoms, in Europe. And then also learning how different the map was, even going back to the early 20th century with World War I. Europe is just one of those continents that seems to be constantly changing and evolving. It seems like every decade or two, every couple of decades, something's different. You know, that's the way it seems to me. Maybe it's not that often, but so this is going back to those. Sorry, is Siri on? Okay, I must have. Usually I have Siri turned off, but I got a new computer and I forgot to do that, I guess. But yeah, so this is going back to kind of like maybe just pre-medieval times right here. And so it's just like me trying to figure out, you know, how did Europe look prior to this? So it looks to me like it's just a bunch of tribes scattered everywhere. There aren't any like real countries at this point. It's mostly just, I guess, like I said, tribes that live, maybe these groups of people that just kind of live together. I'm sure some cities and villages existed and stuff maybe that they've created, but there doesn't seem to be any official borders of like countries and all of that. So this is something brand new that I'm trying to wrap my head around is yeah, like I said, what was the geography of Europe back in the day?
While they shared a common language and culture, the Eastern Slavs were not politically united, divided into many tribes that operated on complex kinship ties. They tended to avoid the high ground, settling along rivers and lakes where water was abundant. There they built strongholds with enclosed earth and timber ramparts, wooden walls and an external ditch. These bastions were often surrounded by various peripheral villages, which provided grain and livestock. Not much is known about the native religion of the early Slavs, other than that they held to a pantheon of gods resembling those of their Indo-European cousins. The most well-attested to of these is Perun, their god supreme, wielder of thunder and lord of the sky. His eternal foe was Veles, ruler of the underworld, associated with magic, shamanism and sorcery. There were of course many other deities, embodying fertility, fire and the passing seasons, among other things. Pagan Slavs saw their gods as being tied intrinsically with the untamed wilderness in which they lived, and built their shrines in oaken groves. It should be noted that early Slavic society is reconstructed primarily through later Christian writers, who looked upon their pagan forebears with disdain. Nevertheless, some information can be passed from the sources available to us. For example, the law of hospitality was the most sacred of rites to tribal Slavs. All guests were cherished without exception, and any tribe who mistreated an itinerant traveller would be attacked by neighbouring tribes for their dishonour. War was not uncommon, both with the Balts and Finns and amongst the Slavs. They avoided pitched battles, instead fighting in dense woodlands with ample cover, while using short iron spears, heavy wooden shields, and bows nocked with poison-tipped arrows. The lives of the early Eastern Slavs were decentralized and chaotic, yet there was order and harmony through their shared customs. Nonetheless, things were soon to change, as new arrivals came from the north on the decks of dragon-headed longboats. At the turn of the 9th century, the Scandinavian peninsula had a burgeoning population. In a cold, mountainous climate, good farmland was a rarity. This pushed the Norsemen to sail from their homes seeking new lands. Generally speaking, the Danes went westwards, where they became known to the English and French as Vikings. The Swedes, however, ventured to the east, where they quickly discovered the mighty rivers spanning down the continental mainland. By sailing down the crucial waterways of Eastern Europe, the Norsemen became deeply engaged in the trade networks that had existed in the region for centuries. At the confluence of the Kama and Volga, they encountered the Bulgars, with whom they traded furs, wax and honey in exchange for silver. Occasionally they rowed further upriver and traded with the Khazars, whose control over the steppe had granted them rule over an incredibly wealthy land of diverse peoples, including many Slavic tribes. Meanwhile, those who sailed up the Dnieper soon found themselves in the Black Sea, and before long, the Eastern Roman capital of Constantinople. They called this splendorous place Miklagard, literally meaning the Great City. According to Roman sources, the Norsemen laid siege to the imperial capital in 860, striking like a lightning bolt from heaven, before ultimately being forced to retreat after a storm destroyed their fleet. With that said, the Romans were made to accept the Varangians as partners in commerce, making them wealthy with silks and wine. War and trade helped the Norsemen prosper, and that wealth meant they were there to stay.
I mean, you have to have some guts to attack the Roman Empire. I feel like even if it's just the Eastern Roman Empire, you've got to have some guts to say, okay, we're going to go and attack their capital city like this. What was the, if he said what the point of that was, I missed it, but what exactly was the purpose of them doing that? Was it just to try to put themselves on equal footing with the Romans, or were they actually like trying to take over the city for their own benefit? Like, what exactly was the thinking behind that for the Slavs?
Of course, flying down the great rivers meant that the Norsemen inevitably passed through the Slavic territory. The Slavs called them Varangians or Rus, terms likely derived from the Old Norse words meaning pledged companions and the people who row.
Okay, I forgot. I
Slavs
missed what he said about the Rus.
Wine. War and trade helped the Norsemen prosper, and that wealth meant they were there to stay. Of course, flying down the great rivers meant that the Norsemen inevitably passed through the Slavic territory.
Oh.
The Slavs called them Varangians or Rus, terms likely derived from the Old Norse words meaning pledged companions and the people who row. Initial interactions between them were hostile, as the Norsemen often raided Slavic villages, exacting tribute and taking slaves to trade in the southern markets. Within a few decades, the Scandinavians dominated not only the Slavs, but Finns and Balts as well. It would be this intersection of cultures that would give rise to the first united ruling dynasty in Russian history, the Rurikids. Before we explain the rise of the Rurikids, we should note that much of early Russian history is known through the Primary Chronicle, written in the year 1113 AD by a monk, Nestor. While his works are considered the most valuable source of knowledge on this era, the legitimacy of his work is often called into question by modern historians. Still, the Primary Chronicle presents the only complete story moving forward, and its tale will be the one presented by us. According to Nestor, the Slavs, Finns and Balts revolted against their Scandinavian masters at some point before 860 AD, driving them back across the Northern Sea. Evidently, the Norsemen had been something of a stabilizing force in the region, for once they had been expelled, the Slavic tribes quickly devolved back into habitual warfare with themselves and their neighbors.
Okay, again, like, he's not really telling me what the years are with this, he's just kind of like vaguely referring to things. So, I'm not sure at what point in history we are at this point with this map. If you guys can let me know. I'm assuming we're probably in the Middle Ages by now, what I noticed here is we have the first inklings of a more modern Europe. So we have the Swedes, the Finns, Estonians, Lithuanians, Polands, which eventually became Poland, Denmark, the Norsemen, similar to Norway. So I'm assuming Norway comes out of the name Norsemen. Bulgars, which is the Bulgarians, I'm sure. So we're starting to see some division of what would eventually become these countries. So this is really fascinating for me. I've really never studied this. I mean, we did, I'm sure, go over this stuff in history class, but again, it was just a very, very quick overview, stuff that, I learned a really long time ago, and I don't, recall much of it at all. So this is really a part of history that I've never really paid much attention to. It's just kind of seeing the evolution of an entire continent here and seeing it without these countries existing. I guess it would be similar to learning American history prior to the expansion westward and all of 50 states being here. America was very much a wilderness with the, native tribes, the Indian tribes. So it's similar to that, I suppose. I've just never looked at it on another continent before, so I know this is probably coming across as incredibly ignorant or naive to a lot of you who know all of this stuff. I feel like this is basic history that probably everybody should know, in the world. Kind of knowing how we came to be where we are now. I don't think most people know this though, which is a shame. But I'm glad that I'm learning it here. This was a good video. Nikolai, I'm really enjoying this so far.
The Chronicle had this to say: "There was no law among them, but tribe rose against tribe. Discord thus ensued among them, and they began to war against one another. They said to themselves, 'Let us seek a prince who may rule over us and judge us according to the law.' They went overseas to the Varangian Ruses, and said to the people of Rus, 'Our whole land is great and rich, but there is no order in it. Come to reign and rule over us.' The prince invited by the Slavs was named Rurik. Promptly accepting their offer, he settled amongst his new people in 862. Rurik established his capital on the Volkhov River, likely on the site of an older Slavic stronghold.
Okay, so I don't really understand this. So they invited the Vikings, a Norseman, the Slavs invited a Norseman, or Rus as they called him, to come and rule over them. I'm assuming there is some sort of mutual benefit for them doing that, or they had to because the Rus controlled the territory, maybe more so than they did, so they didn't really have an alternative. But I would have thought that the Slavic people would want to establish their own government and one of their own people to rule them, rather than inviting somebody else from another background, another people. So that's interesting that they did that. I don't really think I understand the context of why, though.
His city soon grew to become a prosperous hub of riverbound trade, and became known to the Slavs as Novgorod. For 17 years, Prince Rurik worked to stabilize his realm, establishing laws and formal tributary rulership over the many native tribes of the region. He died in 879, leaving his realm to his kinsman Oleg.
Toward the early Middle Ages here.
Oleg was the classic embodiment of a Viking warrior, an ambitious prince who sought to expand his lands through conquest. To that end, he turned his gaze upon the Great Khaganate to the south. Ruling the crossroads of an international trading hub, the Khazars were naturally tolerant of the many tribes and religions in their domain.
This is where Kazakhstan comes
In one
from?
of history's more peculiar twists, the Turkic rulers had even converted to Judaism. Among their tributary subjects were the majority of the Eastern Slavic tribes in the south. For centuries, the Khazars prospered in their steppe land. Oleg, however, was not a foe to be trifled with. He had all the tribes of the north united under him, and commanded a vast army comprised of Norse, Finnic and Slavic warriors. According to Nestor, Oleg sailed his army up the Dnieper River in 882, seizing the towns of Smolensk and Lubeck en route. Before long, they arrived upon the wooded hills of Kiev, an ancient outpost most likely...
Rus, Russia. Is that where Russia comes from? I don't know if it is or not, but it just dawned on me that that's probably where the term Russia comes from. Huh. So it was from the Slavs calling the Norsemen who didn't invade, but they came down to look for trade with the Slavs. So if that's true, if Russia does originate from this name that the Slavic people called the Norsemen, are the Norsemen the kind of predecessors to Russia then? I would have thought it was just the Slavs, but okay, so maybe the Norsemen have also kind of make up that. Maybe they settled there, and then they also became the predecessors of Russia, Soviet Union, whatever. It's been called a bunch of different things, I think, throughout the history, but so them along with the Slavs, they kind of merged together to make what we would consider modern day Russia. those people. And so they have a little bit different makeup than, I guess, the Baltics and the Balkans, who are just more of maybe that purely ethnic Slav. I don't know. I feel like I'm going off the rails here. I'm probably making a bunch of assumptions that aren't correct. Because I don't really know anything about it, but this is, okay. By the way, I remember Smolensk from the Napoleonic War series. He fought a battle there.
Most likely founded by Eastern Slavic migrants as early as the 5th
We
century.
back up just a little bit.
Outpost. Before long, they arrived upon the wooded hills of Kiev, an ancient outpost most likely founded by Eastern Slavic migrants as early as the 5th century. By the time of Oleg's arrival, Kiev was a vassal of the Khazars and was ruled by the Norse warlords Askold and Dir, who evidently were the ones behind the Varangian attack on Byzantium back in 860. Oleg is said to have confronted his fellow Norse rulers, decrying them boldly, saying, "You are not princes, nor even of princely stock, but I am of princely birth." Askold and Dir were promptly slain, and Oleg took firm control of Kiev. He was quick to see the value of this town. Kiev was surrounded by fertile soil, and its position along the Dnieper River gave it the potential to be a heart of trade and commerce. Oleg declared himself the Prince of Kiev, and decided it would be from there he would rule the rest of the realm. Soon he ventured on, wresting more Slavic tribes from Khazar control. By 885, the prince had united the vast majority of the Eastern Slavs under his rule. It is here that the Kievan Rus was born, a nation that would survive for 3 centuries and grow to become among the most prosperous in medieval Europe.
A nation.
Kiev was its grand.
So he just called it a nation. So is that kind of what these are then? So are we starting to see that turn from just a bunch of tribal people spread out to now there are the tribes? Some of the tribes are starting to group together and form these nations, and maybe they don't have formal borders like we might have today or we think of today. But they're starting to kind of like see these different tribes and villages and people seeing themselves united under one nation now, kind of for the first time. I'm not sure if they're just talking about this region, or I'm sure that this is going on. We have, in other parts of Europe too. Yeah, like this is I don't know. I don't know why I'm finding this so interesting. I think it's just a part of history that I've not really, like I said, paid attention to, not really thought about before. It's kind of fascinating for me to kind of see, just like I said, the evolution of this, and just kind of where everything we know of today came from.
Grand capital, from which the descendants of Rurik and Oleg ruled as princes of the Rurikid dynasty. While Rus originally referred to the nation's ruling Scandinavian elite, in time, all the tribes of the Kievan realm, whether Slavic or Nordic, simply came to be known as the people of the Rus. Through fate and conquest, the Rurikid princes had given their names to the land, which Russia, the land of the Rus, retains to this day. Of course, the work of the Rurikids was far from done, and there are many stories still to be told, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button.
Yeah, go subscribe to Kings and Generals. It's a nice channel. Okay, well, man, I really enjoyed that, Nikolai. As I said earlier in the video, it was really interesting for me to see a lot of these, the early stages of Europe and how it kind of evolved. And I don't know if you guys probably wouldn't even call it the early stages over in Europe because your history is so old over there. I still think of things in terms, in American terms, where anything prior to like 1700 is old, Actually, anything prior to 1800 we would consider old over here. It's I know it's not something that the rest of the world understands, because you guys your history goes back thousands of years, and you see remnants of that, you know, in the places you live. You can go back and you can see ancient Roman ruins, and you know, I guess just like little traces of these sorts of things that, you know, we learned about in this video. You guys can go back and see that in your respective countries and in other parts of the world. I guess particularly in Europe and Asia. But it was interesting because I was thinking about, you know, what it would be like to live in a country where that existed, you know, where your history goes that far back. I would imagine that it would be a very different vibe, a very different culture would come out of that than what we have here in the US, where our culture is very much based on more modern history. And so we just have a different way of thinking about things over here. We have a different way of doing things over here. One of my viewers in my last video I did yesterday, actually, on the Guy Fawkes night, which I'm sorry guys, it is called Guy Fawkes night, not day. I was just going with day because that's what the guy that made the video called it. But on that video, one of the viewers basically made the point of, yeah, our celebrations, I think, went a different direction over here in Europe than they did in the US because of the time difference. You know, we have, you know, like I said, thousands of years of history that have influenced how we celebrate certain things. Whereas in the US, you guys have a much more modern, I don't know, ideology on, not ideology, but a more modern way, I guess, of approaching things like holidays and that sort of thing. So I understood what they were trying to say with that, and it was a really interesting point. And I think it really hits the nail on the head about some of the of why some of these cultural differences exist. So yeah, Nikolai, again, thanks for the video. Really enjoyed it. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't done that yet. I would certainly appreciate it. And also check out my social media if you haven't done that yet. You'll see that link in the description and my pinned comment. Appreciate it if you go check that out. And Roger, Scarlett, and I thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more stuff like this coming up on my channel soon. And we will see you next time.